Thank you so much for
Good
joining
to be
me.
here. I thought I'd bring a bit of optimism to the pessimism that you're exhibiting about India.
Thank you so much for joining me, Martin Sorrell. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
I met you last, end of June at Cannes,
right.
and it's barely been 5 months. And what a role S4 has been on.
Well, we've done well organically. Everybody thinks we're an acquisition machine, which is not so. I mean, we're a merger machine, maybe. No, we're not even that. But no, organically, the business is doing extremely well. We just reviewed the October numbers before I took off on the plane to come here, and another good month in October. And November and December set fair, and next year looks good too. So in a world where there is this pessimism, well, you're too probably connected to traditional media. I mean, in America, traditional media in the first 6 months of this year were down 3%. Digital was up 20%. The overall industry was up 6%. So cheer up, it's not that bad.
Well, just for the uninitiated the viewers watching, we're really talking about the economy and the downturn that the country and of course world over the economy is facing.
Yeah, but Sonali, it can't carry on like this. I mean, nothing, no company, no economy can carry on going like that. It oscillates around. It might have a secular growth trend, which I believe India has, and in the long-term future of India, I remain a raging bull in the context of India. But there have to be oscillations, and the world is not growing fast. I mean, the world is probably growing at about 4%, and I think the powers that be, the IMF, the World Bank, Goldman Sachs, and everybody are forecasting that 2020 probably will be a slightly more difficult year, primarily because of the trade war between China and the US. I mean, which the trade war is the tip of the iceberg. I think the real issue is America's acceptance of the growth of China. I mean, that's the key issue. I don't think America has come to terms yet with the rise of China.
I have to ask you a question here. I've been interviewing you now for almost a decade. And
that makes us both very old.
Absolutely. But I have to say, 2008, we saw the big meltdown. Yeah. And ever since then, there has been no real recovery.
Well, wait a second. No. I mean, 2009, there was was the pressure point after Lehman. 2010, we saw a V-shaped recovery, a considerable, far better than we thought it was going to be. And then 11, 12 and onwards was continued economic growth, not at the levels pre-Lehman, to your point, because we have very little inflation. So nominal GDP growth has been significantly less than pre-Lehman, but the fundamental reason has been there's been no inflation in the system. And that has meant that our clients have had less pricing power, which means they've been very focused on cost. And then in 2016, the platforms, basically Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent and Alibaba, signaled to clients, particularly the Western three, that the walls in the walled gardens were going to be built higher because of brand safety reasons, because of interference in election, GDPR, privacy concerns. And then our clients started to think, well, look, if we're going to exercise any influence on the relationship between you and me as consumers, or between them and us as consumers, what we have to do is to get control of data. So the big battleground is who controls the first party data. That is the data about what you and I are buying or what we're watching on television or whatever it is, so that not knowing our names to preserve the privacy, but understanding what our purchasing habits are, how they're changing, what our media habits are and how they're changing, and then using that data to create content, particularly in a digital environment, which we at S4 are totally focused on, and then distributing it programmatically, which means distributing it personally at scale. So personalization at scale becomes very important too. So the systems change.
Is the jury still out on who controls the data?
Yes. I mean, yes, it is. I mean, clients now are trying to gain control. So you see Unilever buying Dollar Shave Club. You see Coca-Cola buying Costa. You see Nestle. We did the launch of Nestle Starbucks. Nestle pays $7 billion for the rights to Starbucks in perpetuity, very interestingly, with a retail franchise as well, the small retail, the small box sort of Starbucks retail. So it's a very, very powerful franchise that Nestle acquired. And I think part of the reason, I don't know, but I guess part of the reason was that they wanted to demonstrate to Amazon that if they wanted, the Starbucks capsules on their platform, they would have to negotiate a better deal in relation to data than perhaps they were prepared if the brand was not as strong. And the Amazon issue has come sharply into focus. You've seen recently that Lady Gaga launched a line of cosmetics. You've seen Amazon say they're going to launch a premium gin. To drink alcoholic drinks online. The Allbirds shoe, which is very popular, even President Obama wears them. They've launched a shoe at half the price. A sustainable ESG shoe at half the price. So Amazon, your margin, my opportunity is the Bezos motto. So they see firsthand what's happening at the consumer. So there's this fight, if I can put it like this, between our clients who want to exercise a direct consumer influence. Because in the old days, Walmart, Carrefour, Tesco exercised that control in store. And when the internet came along, our clients thought, well, we'll have that direct relationship.
Sure.
Then in 2016, it didn't evaporate. But the walls and the walled gardens, as I said, have got higher, and they felt precluded to some extent from that direct relationship. And their strategy is built around two things, really. First is a bricks strategy, which is counterintuitive given what's happening to retail, for example, in the US and UK. I mean, I was with a big packaged goods manufacturer in New York a few weeks ago, and the chairman said to me, the pace of pressure on US retail is intensifying to such a degree. I mean, you're almost seeing sort of things collapse before your eyes. So e-commerce is, this in an Indian context is a very interesting thing because of the power of retail distribution and the political importance of retail distribution in India. So, but these changes are phenomenal. So our clients are developing a brick strategy. So Nespresso has its stores where they garner information, first-party data from you and I about what our coffee drinking habits are. You develop Nestle.com or Nespresso.com, whatever it is. You see it with Christian Dior, for example, in China. They have 200 stores where they're selling perfume, through their own distribution, not through department stores, which are coming under pressure. And then they develop Dior.com, the site, actually selling lines of perfume which are not available to Amazon, right? So,
sure. But
and
is that sustainable? I mean, that's a lot of investment.
I think that's where the model is developing. So you've got counterintuitively in a world which is becoming obviously more digital, you've got physical retail becoming more important as long as you control it, because department stores and other channels of traditional distribution around the big box stores are under pressure. And then you have the .com e-commerce where you garner the data as well and establish a direct relationship. So you get the direct relationship in both channels.
So what you're saying is that in time, all big retail giants will merely become suppliers of small and medium businesses?
No, because because it depends how fast they adapt. I mean, Target yesterday came out. Brian Cornell's the chairman and CEO of that, has done a superb job of changing the Target model. Target, as some of us call it in the West, the Target model, and adapting it to the online model. Best Buy, Hubert Joly. I mean, I heard him make a presentation in America, and he put it the best way actually about legacy companies dealing with digital disruption. Retail, very difficult. In the audience for that presentation was Bezos from Amazon, and clearly, just like Target, Best Buy has a good relationship with Amazon. And Hubert said, he came from Carlson, which was a hospitality cruise ship company, French, middle of America, Minneapolis. So it didn't sort of fit in many people's minds, but he's done a superb job. And he said after the first 6 months, everybody was telling him that digital disruption was about change management. So after 6 months, he changed the management. So, what it needs is tremendous, almost violent change, which in the listed sector, what I call uncontrolled listed sector, in other words, where management doesn't have control, is very difficult to do. In the listed sector where you don't have control, like say WPP is a good example, it's very difficult to implement the change that is needed because it's so so significantly structural that most managements, because the average CEO lasts for 5 years, most managements are not prepared to take that long-term view. And indeed, institutions, have a quarterly focus or at best an annual focus.
Sure.
So they're not willing to give management enough rope.
Yeah.
Another interesting guy went into Telenor, Scandinavian telecommunications business, took a 1.2 billion write-off because he'd just gone in as CEO. So you get a honeymoon period for a period of time. But normally, it's very difficult to make a significant structural change as you want to in that uncontrolled environment. So when you have control, the much criticized models where people, I have a sort of golden share in the case of S4 Capital, and but you see it at Google, you see it at Facebook, people criticize it. I actually think it's a very good structure because management in those cases
owners.
They're owners, that's a very important point. So you unify the objectives and the incentives, but more importantly, you get them to take a long-term view. Average company now, according to McKinsey, I think it lasts about 17 years on the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500. So, that's obviously longer than 5 years. Private equity is not, in my view, the route to go because private equity, the average hold period is about 5 years. So inevitably, it's a short to medium-term view rather than a long-term view.
I know that you've come down here to India to announce the big merger with Media Monks with White Balance,
right?
And
to launch Mighty Hive.
And to launch Mighty Hive in India, and true to your love to India, you've come and you've launched very soon after S4's launch. Having said that, I do want your view as a veteran in this space, and I'm sure you've met many clients already. Our GDP, you might be optimistic about our GDP number at 5%, but for all of us,
I have to come and cheer you up because you're in such a depressed state.
There are job losses. There's a lack of consumption, serious lack of consumption. People are in saving mode because the future looks very uncertain.
What is when you look at it, you have to think about what's happening to the world. The world is slowing because of the trade spat between, primarily because of China and the US. We've had a reasonably good 10 years, despite what you said, post-Lehman. Economic growth has probably been better than we anticipate. So I think you have to look at it that way. We've had a long-term bull market from a stock market point of view in the main markets. The economy has been reasonably steady state. It can't carry on growing, at a phenomenal rate. There has to be oscillations. And Germany is technically in recession, 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. UK avoided that in the last quarter, but I think 0.4% GDP growth. So 5% for me looks pretty good in that context. US, we have the US election next year. Usually in an election year, economic growth is pretty good because the president wants to go to the country, if it's an incumbent president, with a good economic picture and people vote with their wallet. So I think you're probably being a little bit too negative. The people I've talked to so far here, and we'll see a lot of people here in Mumbai today and tomorrow, basically say the economy is under pressure, but they see things happening and the government is doing things that will provide a solid base for the future. So, for example, the sort of unofficial economy,
the black money,
the black economy, they're rooting out, and I don't know what proportion of the economy that represented before the government's program, but let's say it was 60% or 50% or 40%, it's being reduced, and that will provide a much more solid base going forward for the future. So I think you have to look at it from a long-term view. I remain very bullish on India. Valuations in India for companies are very high. Private equity valuations, stock market valuations generally remain very high. That's because of cheap money.
Yeah, exactly.
Zero interest rates. And that's driven a lot of value. But having said that, talking to the people...
What about client sentiment? Because nobody's spending.
Well, I was with one of our major clients yesterday. Their volume is up 10%. Right, my old company, brilliant company, WPP here, which we built over 30 years, with a 50%, Srini and Piyush are doing a fantastic job here, and it's the jewel in WPP's crown. I mean, you know, WPP's flat on its back, but India is flying. So India is flying. What, last quarter was 15%. You reminded me that the overall business was down about 0.7%, but you know, India remains a jewel. Now, there's more inflation in the media here. You know, the media industry probably overall is growing at about, I don't know, 10%, let's say. As I said, WPP did 15. Digital piece of it's growing at about 30, 35, 40%. Traditional, less so, probably around, you know, high single digits. So, but inflation, India is a different advertising market because traditional media, the press and TV remains, you know, dominant, the dominant. Although over time that's going to change. You know, the streaming wars or the streaming industry is going to become more important, and digital. You know, the growth of smartphones. Here we were talking about the smartphone companies. The penetration is ever increasing. The sophistication of the devices. 5G here will have a massive impact on the way that people consume content and consume advertising. And so, you know, and in our case, we're totally focused on digital. We're only interested in, you know, it's a $500 billion global industry, and about 225 billion is digital, about 45%. The balance is traditional. In America, first half of this year, that's up 20% on the digital side. Traditional is down 3%. So, you know, we believe in pushing on an open door. We think we're averagely intelligent and we should push on the open door.
But are you saying that because you think, you know, the economy is under pressure here and people are really have tightened their purses, it's really an opportunity for a company like yours because, you know...
Well, it's an interesting question because, you know, analysts say to us, you know, you're growing at 50% organically. You know, in a recession, if we're in a recession in 2020, which I don't think I think we'll see a further softening of global growth. It won't be a recession, right?
So sad.
So, but then it'll come back again. In that sort of environment, the analysts say, well, do you think people will invest in digital transformation? And I think the answer is probably yes. I'm obviously subjective about it. Yeah. I'm not going to say no, but I think what the mental process is, you know, if we're going to have a tough time and we have to transform our business and take hits in terms of writing off historic costs or whatever it is, let's get it over with and done with. So I think there will be an acceleration in interest in digital transformation, business transformation, whatever you want to call it. I think that will become more important, not less important.
Sure. You know, given that the number of acquisitions you're making across the
mergers
globally,
you know, I mean, it is important actually because just the point is, you know, we have 4 principles. One is we're purely digital because that's what growth is. Secondly, is this holy trinity model of first-party data driving the development of content and programmatic in a continuous loop. Third thing is faster, better, cheaper. Faster means agility, better means better understanding of the digital ecosystem, and cheaper means more efficiency. And then finally, a unitary structure. The earn-out structure, you know, we're not looking for people who want to sell out. So, for example, Robbie and Mansi, the 2 principals at White Balance, both want to build a business. They don't want to sell and get out after the earn-out period. What they want to do is to build it. So our arrangements with them are heavily equity-based, roughly half cash, half equity, as we've done with everybody else. Because what we're doing is trying to engage the principals in building the enterprise as a whole, as one.
So, you know, these mergers that you are, you know, you're making at a very rampant pace. Yeah. My question is, it's merging 2 cultures, people working together is always tough.
No, that's a good question. Right? It's always difficult. Whatever scale you do it at, whether you do it at big scale, you know, like at WPP, you know, slamming JWT and Wonderman together. You know, in India, for example, Wonderman didn't exist, and you call it Wonderman JWT. The people at JWT feel lost. Ogilvy was untouched. You had Y&R, which didn't exist because Aaron Nanda, controlled the Y&R operation. Dentsu had an interest in it as well. But you had Y&R and VML. VML really, you know, didn't have a big operation here either. And you call it VML Y&R, and people look at you as though, you know, you came from the moon. So it's very difficult to do these things, and slamming things together, you destroy probably, if you do it too quickly, you destroy more than you create. We've seen that at Publicis, for example, when they put the Publicis name over Sarges and BBH and Burnett, and the Sapient name over Digitas, LBI, Rosetta, and Razorfish. So I think you have to do it more carefully, but you're right, even at a small scale. So what we've done is, we're not a holding company. What we're trying to do is try and create a unitary structure with a content practice, and we call it practice deliberately because we're trying to position ourselves more as a consultancy business than an agency business. So content practice, the brand there is Media Monks. For example, White Balance will become Media Monks India, just like Prog Media became Mighty Hive on the programmatic side. So on the programmatic side, we have Mighty Hive, and ultimately, and Prog Media in Brazil and Latin America is Mighty Hive in Latin America. But what we're trying to do is to create the content and the programmatic, and then ultimately bring them together as one. I mean, for example, in Singapore, they're already in one building. We're looking at the same thing in San Francisco. We're looking at the same thing in New York, in London, bringing everybody together as one firm, which, ironically, is what the holding companies are trying to do. But the trouble is, the scale at which they have to do it is huge. And you look at in India, for example. Last time I looked at it, which was a couple of years ago, I think WPP India was about 13 or 14,000 people, and in many verticals. They talk about simplifying it. People like business inherently is you can't tie it up. You can't do it by spreadsheet management. You can't sit in London and sort of draw a nice diagram and say, everybody's going to conform to the diagram. It has to be inherently a bit messy at that scale. We have the advantage of being, the motor torpedo boat rather than the aircraft carrier, and that gives us, I think, a certain agility and advantage. But you're right, behind your question, there are issues that we have to deal with, and they're not dissimilar. The only difference is the scale is much less. But people do have but we've really decided we'll have the content and the programmatic, and we'll bring those two together.
So you have all these very, very talented founders who you're getting into your system, and I'm sure they'd all be happy to work and report to you. But how does it work with reporting?
Well, we do. We have structure. I mean, again, it's a perspicacious question, whether the real way to put it, because what we've done is, Wes and Victor, the two Dutch partners. Wes sits in LA, running the Americas for Media Monks, which is our content practice, and Victor sits in Amsterdam and looks after EMEA and Asia Pacific, and then Pete Kim sits in San Francisco and New York, looking at Mighty Hive and our programmatic on a global basis, and Chris Martin sits in Tokyo, obviously. He's sort of effectively chief operating officer of the programmatic operation, but looks at it from a global point of view from Tokyo, because we're building our business, and not just in Japan, but in Asia. But what we've done is so Datalicious, the Korean company, which changes its name to Mighty Hive, Convergence Works will change its name to Mighty Hive. Report into Chris and Pete, and Wesley and Victor look after Firewood. Juan and Lanya report in there into Media Monks. So it all fits. White Balance will report into Media Monks on the content practice. So it all fits neatly together. And I think people feel comfortable with that. I mean, Media Monks has done extremely well. Organic growth rates, 35% so far this year. And on the programmatic side, we've been growing at about 65, 70%. So combined, the two, growing at about 50%. And I think that works very well. And they're not agency people. I mean, on the programmatic side, Pete comes from Yahoo and Google. Chris comes from Yahoo. Lexi, who's the CTO, comes from Salesforce. They're nerds. They're not, I'm sure they won't mind me saying that. They're nerds. They're not agency people. In fact, if you suggest they're agency people, they get quite offended.
Sure.
On the content side, they're production people. They're directors. They're not classic agent. We do have some agency people, but they're not classic agency people. It's very different. Average age of the Mighty Hive people is about 25. Average age of the Media Monks people is about 33. So it's a different It's a different mentality. And when you do have that sort of mission, which is to create the new model and disrupt the old, that sort of binds people together. But you know, to be honest, we're in the early stages of this, and we see how it pans out.
I need to ask you one controversial question before I let you go, because you know,
as always, you couldn't resist.
Because you're controversy's favorite child. So
I'm not.
And you know what I'm referring to? I'm referring to the conference in Portugal.
No,
and the allegation.
You've seen our response.
I have.
Well, that's it.
I still have to ask it.
Well, just look at the response.
What were they thinking?
What were they thinking?
What were they thinking?
Just causing trouble. They like to cause trouble.
Is it?
Yes.
You think so?
Absolutely.
And you don't like to cause trouble?
No, I don't. No. I just want to build us forward. I think that's what they're worried about.
Yeah. So you're saying
there's a wonderful phrase that Morisachi used to have. It's not enough to. It wasn't his phrase. I think it came from a French philosopher. I think it was. We ought to check out where it came from. It's not enough to succeed. Others must fail.
Okay. Okay. On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As usual, my pleasure.
Pleasure.
And looking forward to a great innings for S4 in
Thanks,
India.
Sonali.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much. Thanks.